everyone who hated that bit of a chat. This is now the main event. We're back. We're onto the real show. So welcome to the W Club, the Digital Drams. The thanks for joining us, everyone. I know we've not had a huge amount of these recently, but we do want to keep doing them and bringing them up, especially closer to Christmas. And we've got a few more in the pipeline very soon. So thank you all for joining us. For those joining for the first time, we want these to be super interactive. Do get your tasty notes and comments and everything into the chat box, and we'll address that. And at the very end, I'll be giving out a discount code that'll give you 15% off all these drams, except the new make. We don't sell the new make, and speaking of new make, Chris, do you want to both introduce yourself and the running order for tonight?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name's Chris. I'm the sales manager for International Beverage in Scotland, which is a very sort of corporate sounding title, but I promise I'm not that corporate. So International Beverage, we own 5 distilleries in Scotland. We own Balblair, Knockdhu, home of a-nock, Balmenic, home of Caroon, Speyburn, and of course Old Pulteney. I think for tonight, the running order, we're going to start with a new make spirit. I know it's obviously very high strength, but it is it is sort of the genesis for everything that follows. Then we'll do the 12, then we'll do the 16, then we'll do the peated sherry, and then we'll finish on the peated 10-year-old. So just to clarify, new make spirit, 12, 16, peated sherry, peated 10. It's kind of an unusual lineup because obviously you've got the split between peated whiskey and unpeated whiskey, and so I think if you just looked at the numbers on the bottles, you would finish with the 16. But if we finish with the 16, you won't taste anything other than smoky barbecue bacon. So probably best to separate them out. I have done enough tastings in my life, both on Zoom, on Teams, and in person, that it's always frustrating when someone waffles on and you don't get a chance to have a dram. So I'm going to insist that everyone has a nose of the new make spirit just as a start. So please help yourself, and I'll sort of go into a bit of chat about a-nock. So as I say, International Beverage, we bought a-nock in, excuse me, let me just get some water.
While you're having a sip there, Chris, it's incredibly fruity, this new
It
make.
is, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as we go on, you'll hopefully find out that a-nock is dangerously easy to drink. Okay, now that is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your point of view. But a-nock is an incredibly soft style of whiskey. Ian's asking, is it peated 10-year-old? Yes, it is peated 10-year-old. So that we only do a peated 10-year-old a-nock. So the non-age, the non-peated ones are the 12-year-old and the 16-year-old. Excuse me.
Apologies, Chris, you should have had that, or Ian, you should have had that on the label. But yeah, the labels are just taken off what we call them on the website. So.
That's all right. Paul saying, now I know how to pronounce a-nock. Yeah, so you guys obviously only have small bottles in front of you. I don't know if I'm going to try and get this as close to the camera as possible. If you can see that, it's kind of blurry. Let me see if I can. Not quite. Basically, up here, we spell it phonetically. Pronounced a-nock, because confusingly the capital C is the one C that you don't pronounce in the name. So yeah, we kind of make the one letter that you're not supposed to pronounce the biggest one in there. I digress. a-nock, Knockdhu Distillery was purchased by International Beverage in 1988. It was founded in 1894, so it's actually the second youngest distillery in our portfolio. So we don't have a big portfolio of whiskies. 5 distilleries is not massive, but a-nock 1894. The only one younger than that is Speyburn, which was 1897. a-nock is Gaelic for the hill, which takes its name from Knockhill, which is the sort of backdrop to the distillery up in the tiny village of Knock, which is sort of in between Keith and Huntly. So a-nock is a Highland whiskey, but realistically, if you stood at the entrance to the distillery and threw a stone west, it'd probably land in Speyside. I mean, it's one of those. I think I think that sort of regional differences aren't as important as they once were. And I think if you didn't know this was a Highland whiskey, you would probably assume it was Speyside. Um, so yeah, like the way we make anCnoc is the same as it has always been. It's very, very traditional. Um, we only use bourbon casks and sherry casks. We don't really use anything else. In fact, when I was up at the distillery last year, I spoke to Gordon Bruce, the distillery manager, and he was showing us round, and we went into the warehouse, and I said, "What's kind of like your weirdest cask?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "Well, do you have like port casks or rum casks?" And his response, I quote, "None of that pish. It's just bourbon and sherry." So he's a traditionalist as Gordon, but he's very good at what he does. So yeah, I think I can see in the chat here. There's a lot of chat about plum, raspberry, kind of jam flavors. That's it. I mean, anCnoc is a very, very fruity, light, sort of gentle style of spirit, even at the high strength that it's at. Obviously, feel free to add water to it if you guys want. But yeah, anCnoc is a very, very soft, fruity style. Or a very high ABV slow gin. I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there's some great comments. They were saying that was it Alistair said it's like raspberry or strawberry jam. It's a brilliant tasting note. A bit of plum, says Andy there. And yeah, and get the jam in the mouth too. Some licorice, very jammy and brandy like. Good to soak the sponges in a trifle with this. It's a great shout. It's yeah, I think it's going down really well for a big banging start. What did we say it was? 68.9%. Totally unaged. It's to be honest, we've tried a couple of new makes on this, but you do visit distilleries and they always give you a sip. This is the closest new make I can think of having in recent years to like an eau de vie, like a um from the east of France, but the ones that
Yeah,
they kind
yeah,
of that they age in those steel tankers with the kind of cherries or local fruits and that. So
yeah.
it's really drinkable. Aniseed finish, says Paul. I can see that, Paul. Yeah, yeah. So
I
tell us
think
a bit about this, Chris. How, yeah, sorry, you were going to say?
no. Just gonna say, I think new make spirit. Obviously, it's not necessarily the most common thing in the world. It tends to just be in sort of tastings like this that people get an opportunity to drink it. And I think that as I kind of mentioned earlier, this is the genesis of everything that comes after. So if your new make spirit is not good, and this is not news to anybody, everybody knows this, but if your new make spirit's not good, everything else you make is just going to be subpar. So Gordon and the team at Knockdhu, and indeed with all of our distilleries and with every distillery around the world, the aim is to make the new make spirit as close to perfect as possible, so that once you're putting it into casks, you're drawing the best flavors into the best spirit. It's very easy to just put new make spirit in a first fill PX sherry cask, and then your whiskey just tastes of PX sherry. But then why would you buy a bottle of £80 PX sherry flavoured whiskey when you could just buy a bottle of PX sherry for £15? So we always want to make sure that the quality is very, very high right from the beginning, right from the very start.
Yeah, and you mentioned that I suppose there's two points pick up from that. One is in terms of this new make. Could you maybe go through what kind of properties within the mash bill and the stills kind of are given the flavors that we're kind of experiencing now? And two, you mentioned I know you maybe touched on this at the very, very start, but just to be clear, you mentioned Knockdhu, which is obviously the actual name of the distillery, I believe, if I pronounced that right.
Yep.
And when the new make came into us, it was labeled as Knockdhu new make, and I was humming and hawing on the labels for this. We've gone with anCnoc new make because we don't want to confuse people who maybe didn't know the difference. So obviously the distillery is called Knockdhu, but the whiskey is bottled as anCnoc. So just for anyone who wasn't clear on that. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so the distillery itself is called Knockdhu. I think the reason for the new make spirit coming in labeled as Knockdhu spirit is because technically it's not anCnoc, because anCnoc is the name of the whiskey.
Hmm.
Knockdhu is the distillery, but that's a very nitpicky point. So we don't worry about that. And in terms of production, so at Knockdhu, the 7 men that run the distillery, and we use all Scottish barley, and we use as local barley as possible. So mashing is 5 tons over 8 hours with a 45 to 48 hour fermentation in washbacks. So it's not a massively long fermentation, it's relatively standard. But yeah, I think it's just sorry, the washbacks are Oregon pine as well, so it's just there's so much kind of fruity flavor getting into the spirit right from the start. Double distillation, so wash is done twice, 2-to-1 wash to spirits run, and then it's a mid-range copper contact. So honey cream melon kind of floral. It's a more dense whiskey than Speyburn, for example, which is the other whiskey in our portfolio that I probably set side by side with anCnoc. If you guys have tried Speyburn, it's that's a kind of softer style. This is a bit more kind of dense. Paul says not undrinkable, unlike some new makes. Thank you, Paul. If you could just sign your name to that and send it to the office, we'll get that on the bottles. I like that.
Well, do you ever do the trick with the new make, Chris, where you kind of pour a bit out on the hands and kind of
Yeah.
Anyone does this, because the high ABV alcohol, folks, if you at 68.9%, if you pour it into your palm and kind of give it a rub around, and you can all these kind of flavors, extra flavors evaporate through your hands. It's quite an interesting way to experience new make, which is a cliche if anyone's been to a whiskey distillery, but maybe some people haven't. I hear it's good for hair growth as well if you want to kind of get it.
I've heard that you just dab it on the back of your hand, and because your nose is attuned to your own scent, you can kind of go, you bypass the alcohol scent and straight to the flavor. But I wouldn't recommend doing it too much in a pub, because you will look like a weirdo as you just keep dabbing your whiskey in your hand and sniffing it. People will be like, why is he not just drinking it? Like, what's he doing?
It's actually much more kind of malty done that way, actually. I don't know if I'm the only one getting that. But yeah, it's a bit of fun.
Richard asks, do we have a selected grower or is it anyone? So we don't have a selected grower. We we use what are they called? Sorry, the name is completely escaping me. We use a large maltster. We currently use Sassy malt, but we're not we take what's available, as I think a lot of distilleries do. But we do maintain it's all Scottish barley. Bayards, sorry, that's the maltster I was looking for. So we use Bayards, but where we can get it more locally, we will. And I think that's a push from Gordon himself. He's a local man, sort of grown up around the area. So yeah, I think obviously local barley is harder because the malting's shut in Knockdhu in 1960, so we can't malt it ourselves. And obviously yields are smaller when you're looking at kind of local farmers. But again, that's because Gordon, he just wants to kind of support the local community as much as possible.
No, very good. And you're not open, the distillery's not open to the public, is it?
So no, it's not open to the public, but it's also probably one of the only distilleries that if you just walk up to the door, someone will show you around. I've done, like I said to you earlier, like I've done quite a lot of shows over the like last couple of years, and the number of people who've told me that Knockdhu was one of the best distilleries they visited, and I kind of went, well, how? But yeah, you just go up, you'll hear 5 dogs before you see them. Someone will open the door of the distillery house. Those 5 dogs will make an appearance very quickly. And yeah, someone will just take you around the distillery. And because it's not, because there is no kind of visitor centre, it's a very sort of, it's not quite behind the scenes, because that's what all distillery tours are. But it's not as like, it's not a guide showing you around reading off a script. It's one of the distillers. So there's like, yeah, just have a taste of that, stick your hand in that, don't touch that, it's hot. And also at Knockdhu, I mentioned earlier, it's very traditional. I see some people are saying in the chat that they've done the tour and it was fantastic. The most advanced piece of equipment in the distillery is a calculator. Now that sounds like a joke, but it's also not a joke because it's true. Everything is just written on whiteboards and written down. There's no computers monitoring anything at all. It's all done by hand. I hope that some of you guys have saved a little bit of new make spirit. I always think it's quite good to hold on to it just to see how it compares against everything else as we go on. But obviously, how you drink your whiskey is none of my business. But we'll move on to the anCnoc 12 now. That Jeff says ended up in the manager's office drinking and chatting. Yep, that's what Gordon does. He sits you down at that big table, and he's like, "Well, help yourself to whatever you want." And then sometimes he'll just leave to go do a distillery thing, and he's like, "Just fire in." And he's got things there that I think the last time I was there, he still had anCnoc 24, he had the 18, he had 1975, he had a couple of bottles of the Peter Arkle, and he had some of the old peated expressions as well, because yeah, he just has them. Obviously, he's got access to whatever he wants. So yeah, it's fantastic. It's a really good distillery, and I probably shouldn't say go visit it because we obviously don't have a visitor centre. But also, if you're passing, I cannot not recommend it enough. Cannot recommend it enough. Just visit it if you get an opportunity. anCnoc 12. Hamish says, love anCnoc, Speyburn, Balblair, and Pulteney. What a killer portfolio. I am quite lucky, Hamish. Yeah, I feel quite privileged in that I get to work with a small and yet perfectly formed set of distilleries.
Yeah, definitely. I know, and I've not visited anCnoc as some of the guys in the chat have, but I've visited Speyburn. It was one of the best distillery tours I've ever done. It was brilliant.
Yeah,
Climbing up in that worm tub and visiting the old maltings is a really yeah, special trip. So that's another one I would recommend if you're up in that area. So we also got weird enough, I get a tiny hint of love hearts on the nose. Is that from the 12 or the new make, Camille? The 12. Yeah, I can see what you mean.
yeah. So the 12 is uh, all American oak. But I believe, and this is being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say. I believe there's a very small amount of uh, sherry influence in here as well. I'm talking like maybe 5% per batch. Now, that's not necessarily been confirmed. I've always thought that, like always, for years and years. You know, anCnoc has long been one of my favorite whiskies before I was working with the portfolio, which is great. Um, I've always thought there was a bit of sherry, and I found an old spreadsheet from a few years ago that suggested there was 5% sherry cask influence in the 12-year-old. And you know what? I've always thought it's there right at the end. I think it's a very kind of bourbon cask forward whiskey, but right at the end on the palate, you get this lovely kind of red fruit lift. It's absolutely fantastic. 40% ABV, which I think contributes to, as Richard has said, so smooth. I think the lower ABV contributes to the kind of, I said it earlier, it's dangerously easy to drink. The anCnoc 12 is like, I probably shouldn't say this because I am a proponent of responsible drinking, but this stuff goes down like juice. It's so good.
Hmm.
And for you non-Scottish people, when I say juice, juice means many different things. You've got fizzy juice, diluting juice, fruit juice. This is just juice. It's good juice.
Richard said, glad you said it. Yeah, it's very smooth. 12-year-old elderflower, says Mitch, which elderflower I think is a great taste. I can get a bit like an elderflower cordial rather than wild elderflower for me, but I can totally see that. Old round trees fruit gums. Paul Francis says, Paul, I don't know if you mean like old round tree fruit gums as in an older style or ones that you've left on the back seat of your car or something. Um, Two very different flavors, I imagine. The hard ones. Yes, I know the ones you mean. Yeah, yeah. Tiny bit of spice on the finish, says Bob. I can see that as well. You're very lucky as well, folks, because this was a gold medal winner in the W Club Awards last year. It's already got a 10% discount. So it's even before tonight's tasting discount, it's 39.15. So down from 43.50. So incredibly good value for a 12-year-old of this quality. Good breakfast whiskey, Paul. I totally agree. You could definitely spread it on your English muffins. The um yeah, no, it's brilliant. So the how long has this been part of the range, Chris?
The 12 has been part of the range pretty much since we took up the distillery in 1988. So you'll find old, well, maybe a bit later than that, you'll find old bottlings of Knockdhu on secondary market. But the 12-year-old has been like the staple of the anCnoc range ever since the anCnoc range was inaugurated, when it changed from being the Knockdhu whiskey to the anCnoc range. And it's not changed. Like I was saying to you earlier, like I used to work for the whiskey shop many years ago, and anCnoc 12. And when I say many years ago, oh geez, like 12 years ago. I'm quite old now. anCnoc 12 was always I think at the time it was top 10. Now I think it's customer favourites. It was always there. I think that Andy says, I think I saw on the internet 43% of the 12-year-old. Is that also available? I think possibly about when I first started in the whiskey shop 11, 10 years ago, possibly it was 43% as opposed to 40. But any kind of newer bottlings, as in from the last 8 years, they'll be 40%. We've just recently rebranded. So I think if any of you guys have a bottle, if you go on the Whiskey Shop website, you'll see the new branding. What we haven't done is changed the liquid of the 12-year-old. It's the only thing that has not changed at all. And even the branding is relatively subtle. It's just sort of modernized a bit. I'm kind of looking at the bottle so I can see it. And I tried to do this earlier, it didn't really work, but it's just like a nice, clean, clear, obvious example. Yeah, fantastic. But I'm glad that you guys like the anCnoc 12, because as much as I said the new make spirit is kind of the genesis of everything, that is true. But equally, that's not something that most people get a chance to try. You're one of the lucky few that got an opportunity to try that. So when I talk about this whiskey, like now they're on to the full range, I would say the 12-year-old is where it all begins. That's anCnoc, like it's pure anCnoc. That's anCnoc in a nutshell, the 12-year-old. And I like genuinely, people don't really believe me because I bleed Knockdhu, but anCnoc 12 is one of my favorite whiskies of all time. Like it's always in my cupboard, top 5 easily, next to, am I allowed to say other brands? Go on. Bunnahabhain 12, another favorite. Springbank 15, can't get it anymore, but I do like it. But yeah, anCnoc 12 is just on constant rotation. It's so good. And the thing about anCnoc, the 12-year-old in particular, it's the kind of whiskey that is complex enough for people who like whiskey and know what they're talking about with whiskey, but it's also simple enough for people who have never tried whiskey before, And I don't mean that in a sort of derogatory way. I mean, it's just smooth and it's easy drinking. It's a crowd-pleasing style of whiskey. It's the kind of whiskey that, you buy a bottle of that and you sit down with 5 friends, that whiskey's gone in like 2 hours, and everyone's having a good time.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. No, it's incredibly approachable whiskey. Yeah, a very good price point as well for the kind of quality and what it is.
Absolutely, yeah.
100%. Color is amazing for the 12-year-old, said Richard. Is natural coloring, is it, Chris?
No, so 40%. So it is non-chill filtered, and it has had color added to it. But I mean, don't hold that against it. Like some of the greatest whiskies in the world are non-chill filtered, chill filtered. Some of the greatest whiskies in the world have color added to them. It doesn't really take away from the quality of the whiskey. That's more of a kind of, that's more of a sales point when you're sort of talking about chill filtration and adding color. The way I kind of describe it is, if you buy a bottle of whiskey, if you walk into a whiskey shop in Bath or the whiskey shop in Victoria Street or the whiskey shop in Buchanan Galleries, you'll have someone there to explain to you what chill filtration is, what non-chill filtration is, what color added is, on all that different sort of information. But if you're in, let's say, Rio de Janeiro, or you're in Peru, or you're in Wisconsin, and you're just in a supermarket, there's no one to explain that to you. So from a sort of commercial point of view, it's actually easier to sell a whiskey globally at 40%, because as you know, if your whiskey goes cold or you add water to it or ice to it, it'll go cloudy. And if no one's explained that, obviously I'm magnetic and enigmatic and I'm explaining it to you right now, but not everyone has that. So someone might buy a bottle of whiskey somewhere, particularly in a hot part of the world where it's maybe more common to drink whiskey with ice. It goes cloudy and they think they've got a dud bottle. So it's not the most interesting answer. I try to make it as fun as possible, but it is just purely commercial. But as I say, the message to take away is like, don't hold that against it. You know, I say the same thing about when anyone ever sort of dismisses a Diageo whiskey. Oh, I don't drink Oban because it's Diageo. Why? It doesn't matter. If the whiskey's good, the whiskey's good. You know. I'll get off
Yeah,
my soapbox now,
I
sorry.
could never take that stance against Diageo because I drink far too much Guinness. But I would never have thought you as as an enigmatic person, Chris, to be honest. But
Oh,
um,
thanks.
I think you know you're quite articulate and charming. But session whiskey for sure, says Bob. So brilliant. So maybe we'll slowly start coming on to the 16. Although if anyone's got any other comments on the 12, do jump in there. In the meantime, in terms of fun facts about anCnoc, was there anything else you wanted to share, Chris, about the distillery?
I've got another funny Gordon story. It's just sometimes I think maybe I shouldn't share these, but then at the same time, it is really funny. So when I visited the distillery, I mentioned the five dogs. He has one dog. They're all different sizes, so they go from like I think he's got an Alsatian all the way down to a little terrier.
And are they his dogs or the distillery's dogs?
Well, there's both. They're his dogs, but he's like a he. Gordon will never leave that post. You know, I think he absolutely loves Knockdhu. Um, but the smallest dog, little terrier, uh, he said to me and my colleagues, and I'm so sorry for the recording. This dog's called Trump Fucker, um, and so we were like, "That's really weird, but okay." Because he says it with a straight face, right? Gordon's very straight faced, but he likes to. He's a funny man. The assistant distillery manager Ali came in, and one of my colleagues said, "Ah, oh, come here, Trump fucker." And Ali's like, "What are you calling him that for?" And they're like, "Well, that's what Gordon said his name is." It's like, no, it's not. That's just what Gordon calls him, and he winds people up with it. That's not his name at all. And it's just for like 10, 15 minutes, we were all just calling this dog Trump. And I don't even know why. Like, I don't. It's such a strange name, but he's just a total wind up merchant. He's a funny man. Something a bit more whiskey related. A few years ago, the warehouse collapsed, and so obviously they had to rebuild the warehouse, but they rebuilt the warehouse with the collapsed stone. So Gordon is a big fan of kind of going green. He wants to reduce the energy output of Knockdhu distillery. He's installed TVRs in the stills, so there's a lot of heat retention. The runoff water, I believe, feeds into sort of like a bog kind of area around to sort of help the wildlife and the birds and stuff. As I say, the warehouse was rebuilt with the same stones that it was built with 100 odd years ago. So yeah, he's a big fan of sort of being as green as possible. 16.
16. I think that's too many syllables for a dog's name, to be honest, you know. You want to
It's
have
a lot,
one,
isn't
maybe
it?
two syllables, otherwise the dog gets confused, you know. And you'll end up shortening it otherwise. You just end up calling the dog Trump. Um,
Or the other one, but neither are
or
good. So
yeah, or yeah. Yeah, I had a cousin of mine who was one of the biggest Liverpool fans in the world, and he had this dog, and he called him Fernando after Fernando Torres, and then the day Fernando Torres signed for Chelsea, the dog became Nando and was Nando for the rest of his life. And the dog died recently, but I was saying to him, I was like, I'd always ask him, "How's Fernando getting on?" And he'd be like, "I don't have a dog called Fernando. What are you talking about?" But Fernando was too many syllables anyway for a dog.
so the 16-year-old is this is a new addition to the range, sort of. I'm sure some of you remember there was a previous 16-year-old, I think going back about 8 years. This is a confusing way to put it. This is not that whiskey. It's not a recreation of that whiskey, but it is the same style as that whiskey. So it is 100% American oak, 16 years old. This is bottled at 43%. The old 16 was bottled at 46. So we kept the strength just a little bit higher for the 16-year-old, just because it's a little bit richer. It's a little bit denser. I actually get quite a lot of popcorn, like kind of sweet popcorn, and kind of nuts, which is interesting because a nutty tasting note I would usually associate with sherry casks, but this one is all completely 100% bourbon cask.
Hmm. Um, I'm agreeing with Kamal here that it's a bit woody on the finish. Got Richard says fantastic clean taste, no aftertaste. I don't know if that is that a is no aftertaste a good thing there, Richard? It'd be interesting if you'd expand on that because obviously some people want the finish, or I'd just love to know what you mean by that. Ian says, is the 16 taking the place of the 18, or will the 18 stay?
So the 18 has been discontinued now. The 16 has replaced the 18. I would recommend if you see the 18 in a shop, just buy it because it's only going to go up in price. I think it's sitting at about £100 if you can find it on a shelf now, ish, maybe 110. But I mean, I haven't seen a bottle of it on shelves for probably a couple of months now, and I travel quite a lot in different shops around Scotland. The 24-year-old is also discontinued, and that will be replaced with a 21-year-old, but the 21-year-old won't launch until next year. It wasn't launched at the same time as the new range. Ian says he's got 2 bottles of the 18 now. Well, you're my new friend, Ian. So if you want to meet up, then feel free to just get in touch.
Yeah, the is this the whiskey equivalent of shrinkflation? You know, the the Mars bars are getting smaller, but the whiskey is just getting 2 years younger.
I think the great thing about the 16 is obviously it's a continuation of the 12, right? So not every whiskey range is a kind of linear range. If you look at Glenfiddich is a brilliant example of this. The 12, the 18, and I think the 23 all sit in one kind of range. The 15, 21, and 26 are all sort of in their own separate range. So if you did a tasting of Glenfiddich 12, 15, 18, 21, that's not a linear progression because there's all different cask types used. Whereas for anCnoc, I know there's only 2 in the unpeated range just now, but it is linear. The 16 is basically the 12-year-old, but 4 years older. But the 16-year-old price point, I don't know off the top of my head what it is at Whisky Shop, but it's price appropriate for a 16-year-old. Because we looked at it and, we could have gone, right, put it out at the same price as the 18, but then why would we do that? That would be shrinkflation. So
Yeah.
what we've done is the 16 is not as expensive as the 18 was. It's price appropriate for the age it's at,
Speaking of which, it's £80 at what we retail at what which we wow, totally forgot how to speak. We retail it at £80. The coupon code tonight will get you 15% off, which means you get it for £68. So it's not bad for a 16-year-old of this quality.
I think that's
Um,
fantastic value for money. £68. I mean, obviously you guys are tasting it. I'm sure you'll tell me if you think it's worth it. But yeah, I think that's a fantastic price.
yeah.
But even at £80, I think it's a fantastic price.
Yeah, no, I thought definitely. I think especially, I mean, you're getting to I suppose, for both of these, for the 12-year-old as well. And I've said this about everything in your portfolio, from the Spey burn to the Balblair. Like, I think a lot of kind of decent 12-year-olds, you're creeping up over £50 at the moment, and you're kind of firmly below that with these. And I'd say the same for the 16-year-old. You're kind of creeping, we mentioned Diageo earlier on. A few of them are closer to 100 than they are 80 anyway. So yeah, no, I think they're all very good value. Paul says hard to get that age whiskey for less except at Lidl. Do you know, actually, a bit of a digression, but I don't know if you have, Chris, or anyone else in the call. When Lidl started doing their own kind of in-house bottlings of these kind of made up Speyside distilleries and that kind of thing, 5 or 6 years ago, I with curiosity bought a bunch of them, but I haven't had any since. Are they actually any of them worth drinking? Do you know, or are they even still doing them?
I think the range is called Ben Bracken.
Is it?
Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. I have tried all 3 because I think before minimum pricing, they were all, well, I suppose if you're in England, it doesn't really matter, but in Scotland, before minimum pricing, £18 or something like that, or maybe about £20. Um, I think they were fine. I can't tell you if they were. I wouldn't say they were fantastic, not because I don't think they were fantastic, just because I can't remember them being fantastic. But I also don't remember them being bad. So I think like worth a punt for sure. I think from memory, the Isla was my favorite. But the Isla is probably Kalila. So like it's going to be good quality. The Highland, I could make an educated guess as to what it might be, and then the Speyside, who knows what the Speyside is?
Yeah, it wasn't this though, was it? No.
No, 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 no.
Miles says Aldi also do a range like the same, not bad, certainly good value. Definitely. Brilliant. It'd be interesting to see, yeah, where they're getting all their whiskey from and that. Marvelous. So any further thoughts on this 16-year-old? Bob has got a Ben Bracken 18, which tastes very like Kahlila to me. Yeah, I suppose with Islay, it's kind of difficult. I can't think of a bad Islay distillery. I can think of lots of, of other ones in Scotland, but I won't name them. But Islay, I can't think of a bad one. Um, I'm sure there is one. But yeah, comment in the chat your least favorite Islay distillery. I'm joking. I'm totally joking. The
Let's tear
the
this chat up, guys. Come on.
yeah, let's totally like take this tasting off the rails. But it could actually also be a really good segue. I don't think we should move on quite yet from the 16 because I know I definitely am still sipping away. Talisker not an Islay though, but so for that reason, I agree. The just for Alistair in the chat there. Um, because the next range is peated. So in terms of you mentioned earlier on in the double distillation process and you're kind of sourcing the barley. In terms of how you operate in terms of the peated runs in the distillery, the non-peated runs, how does that kind of break down in terms of per year? Is it a very small peated batch that gets blended in or married in with non-peated whiskey? How does the peating kind of work in your
So
distillery?
it's 6 months of the year peated whiskey, 6 months of the year unpeated. Obviously, they have the distillation and the mashing stuff has to be separate because all the equipment needs to be properly cleaned after a peated run to make sure that when we do unpeated anCnoc, there's no smoke in it whatsoever. The peated whiskies were actually introduced specifically, I believe, for the Swedish market. So the first peated anCnoc, again, I'm thrown back to my whiskey shop days because I believe it was launched in about 2012, 2013, and it was the anCnoc. Let's see if I can remember this. They did the Flaughter, the Slaughter, the Rascan, and a couple of others, and they're all named after the different peat cutting tools. So I think when people think about peat, obviously peat is it's essentially turf that we dig out of the ground, right? And then we sort of build it into bricks, and then we set that on fire, and then that's what infuses the barley with that peat smoke flavor. But I don't know how modern distilleries and sort of peat diggers and stuff do it, but I know that back in the 70s, different levels of peat were cut depending on how peated you wanted your whiskey. So there was tools that would take it from 2 feet down. There was tools that would take it from 10 feet down, because the further down you go, the more intense that flavor is, because basically that's the stuff that's been in there longest. I think with modern modern distillation, that's not as important, because you can, like distilleries, when we go to maltsters like Baird's, we just tell them what specification we want. So we want 25 ppm, we want 50 ppm, whatever. I think Lafroig always ask for, I think Lafroig's at like 6 to 8 ppm. I think that's what they request. I might be wrong on that. Don't quote me on that. But that's what they ask for. So the peated range, sorry, a bit of a digression there, but the peated range initially launched for Sweden with these peat cutting tools. The reason we launched it for Sweden, I'm sure some of you might know this already, Sweden is probably the only country in the world where I could generalize relatively widely what kind of whiskey they like, and that is peated whiskey. Scotland will drink anything within reason. Like the UK will drink anything within reason. We don't have a particular style that we like. We just like good whiskey. Whereas Sweden, for whatever reason, they absolutely love peated whiskey. So we launched it for the Swedish market. Sweden is still one of our biggest markets for the anCnoc peated expressions. Hamish is saying he's got Peat Heart Batch 1 here. So Peat Heart was a limited release that we did. I think the batch one must have been just before COVID, must have been about 2018. And that sold out. Then we released batch two, that sold out. We released batch three. And at this point, we're thinking all these, batch releases of peated whiskies going really well. So why don't we just turn it into a core expression? So the peated 10-year-old that we'll try later on tonight, it's not the peat heart, but that's the kind of the evolution. That's almost like the culmination of the three peat heart batches. David says he just finished his bottle of peat heart, makes a damn good whiskey highball. Ah, okay. I think I've got a bottle of peat heart downstairs, so I might have to try that, David.
I think a peated whiskey highball in general is normally, I think, fantastic, kind of better than a regular peat highball. Why do you think the Swedish have such a fondness for peat? Is it because they eat so much smoked fish or something? I don't know. Or
I don't know. Is Sweden the country where they have that fish thing that you're supposed to open underwater because it smells so bad?
that could be any of the Nordic countries, to be fair. Like,
Maybe it's just yeah, they just love
that's
extreme.
Iceland,
That's Iceland
isn't
fish.
it? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It does sound like Iceland, to be fair. Like,
But I think that maybe just they like extreme flavors. It's funny, like I say, like it's literally the only country in the world. If you meet a Swedish person or in chat, chances are they'll tell you one of their favorite whiskies will be an Islay. Whether that's Ardbeg, whether that's anCnoc, whether that's Optimor or Kabockin from Tomatin or whatever. It is quite interesting. And the fact that it's noticeable enough that we created a range for that country.
yeah, no,
Kirsty says
definitely.
Norway, they bury the fish till it rots. That sounds absolutely disgusting.
Um, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'd try anything once. It's David says, sus. I'll let you pronounce that, Chris.
Surströmming, that's the one.
Strumming.
That's like I think that's, David, correct me if I'm wrong, that's the thing that is the most, it's like the smelliest thing in the world. If you YouTube people eating it, like they can't even get open and they just. Mitch says, in Iceland, they pee on shark meat before burying it for two. What's going on in the Nordics, guys? Jeez, oh. Oh.
Interesting. The head of our auction site is Swedish, so I must ask him about some of this stuff. My best friend actually lives in Reykjavik. He's working for the University of Iceland at the moment, and I was catching up with him recently, and he was saying like the country is so small that it's out for dinner, and there was these like pub with these big tables where kind of end up on the end of tables at randomers because that's just how it has to work. And Bjorg was on the table with them, and then one of his colleagues at work invited him out for dinner, and he was married to the Swedish Prime Minister. So it's just it's a great country. You just, 6 degrees of separation becomes just half a degree, I suppose. Um, so
Someone
maybe,
mentioned Macmira earlier.
yes,
They went bankrupt last year.
yeah, it was a
So
shame.
I think the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, and it's obviously it's a shame, right? Don't want any whiskey distillery, any whiskey company to go bankrupt because it's a fantastic industry to work in. But the reason they went bankrupt, I think, is because they were maturing their casks underground / in caves, which meant the evaporation rate dropped, but the evaporation rate was already quite low. So when they had 10-year-old whiskey, it was coming out looking near enough like the new make spirit in your first glass because it was just basically not, there was no evaporation, so it was just not absorbing any flavors from the casks. And so they essentially had all these casks of not old, but old enough whiskey, but it was more like 6-month whiskey, Or that's one story I heard because
Is
I
that
was
definitely
chatting with
true?
the
This
guy
sounds like
from.
an urban myth. Like,
Well, I was chatting with the guy from Box. It's not Box anymore. It's, I think, High Coast Distillery, the other Swedish distillery, and I'm sure he's the one who was telling me about this. And so maybe he was just spreading lies about his competitor. I don't know, but he was a nice man. So.
no, it could well be true. I was just one of those things that if a mate told me down the pub, I'd need to check it. Like.
Oh yeah, don't Google it and don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
Can you just cut
The
that out the recording?
no, but like same friend who lives in Iceland. He was saying there's a whiskey distillery opened up like just after during COVID or just after COVID up there. And they were trying to age whiskey. And because it's like above the timberline, it's so far north, and the changes atmospheric pressure are so little, they just can't get it to age. It's just they knew scientifically it was going to be challenging, but it's just been way worse than they thought it was in terms of trying to extract flavor from the wood. Now they're not, they're like a tiny artisanal thing producing, probably 2 casks a week. But yeah, it's I'd say the further north you get, anywhere north of Orkney, maybe, I'd say you struggle aging anything. Although most of Sweden isn't north of Orkney, that I'm trying to think of my geography.
Well,
Um,
I think it's a good point because like you talk about the challenges facing hot countries. So you look at like Jack Daniels in Kentucky and sort of bourbon in general, and maturing the more premium casks in the bottom level where it's cooler, and then the casks that you're going to bottle quicker at the top where it's much hotter. But no one ever really talks about the other side of that, which is cool climate countries. Obviously, Scotland's got a temperate climate, so our evaporation rate, as we all know, is hovers around about 2% a year. But we also own, I didn't mention this before, but we also own Cardrona distillery in New Zealand. We bought that about 2 years ago. And they have, I'm going to use a fancy term, and I do apologize, the diurnal range, which is basically the average temperature from one end of the year to the other is much greater than in Scotland. So in New Zealand, where the distillery is in the South Island, their summers are very hot. So the evaporation rate can go up to, I think, about 8%. But then in the winter, they're so cold that the evaporation rate can drop to zero. So it means that over the course of the year, the evaporation rate is about 2 to 3%, but it evaporates at different rates at different times of the year. Whereas in Scotland, obviously it's quite warm just now. Luke and I were discussing sort of the true Scottish weather earlier, as we like to do. But yeah, like it's quite warm just now. But in general, we just lose about 2% 12 months of the year. So it's quite interesting. Like these little things that I think, particularly when you're talking about Scotch whisky, you don't think of the challenges that other distilleries have. And obviously, we're here to talk about anCnoc and we're here to talk about Scotch whisky. But I think as an industry, like whisky is a fascinating product, and I think it's so interesting how different sort of distilleries cope with it. For example, Prior rum. I don't know if any of you guys have tried Prior rum. That's Thai rum. And to cool that down, the casks are sort of semi-buried near cool water lagoons to keep the rate of evaporation at about 8% instead of 10%. But that 2% makes a lot of difference when you're aging rum in an incredibly humid environment. So yeah, it's interesting all the different things we do. James is asking, where are we up to?
So we're just
So
on
we're
the
on
piece of
to
cherry cask. I was just typing that into the chat there. Now we're just kind of moving on from the 16. We got a bit derailed there, but a good chat, but a digression from our usual services. It's interesting. I think the prior rum. I'll have to check. I should know. I put the email together, but I'm pretty sure yesterday's Whiskey Wednesday had a discount on prior rum. So if it did, pick up a bottle there. You've got Chris's stamp of approval. We've also got some comments in there. Gordon knows more about the Icelandic whiskey than I do. So Floki from Iceland, and I googled it after he said that, and he's right. That was 2009, so I was way off with my timings, but I still stand to my original story. Hamish says Iceland sheep dung smoked whiskey, an acquired taste, but I strangely acquired in Iceland. Not normally a fan of peaty whiskey, but this is changing my view. Love this one. Cardrona is incredible. We've had Cardrona on twice on these digital drams, Chris. And then Hamish has said had an amazing time at Cardrona, treated like royalty. Hamish, I think earlier on, did he say he was in anCnoc? He's obviously a guy gets around well on distilleries.
I'm getting to
James.
think Hamish might be a colleague of mine I've just never met.
Yeah, no, possibly. It would make sense if it sounds like he's visited all the distilleries. He's just visited all the ones that you own. Um, Andy says a soft type of peated whiskey, not too aggressive, maybe a good introduction to peat. Now, I'd actually not heard what you had said earlier on about the how deep down they dig down for versus peated levels. I always assumed it was just long exposure, light exposure kind of thing, like almost like developing or shooting on a film camera. So I always pictured the kind of ppm levels. But what are the ppm levels in this whiskey?
So previously, we used to put the ppm levels on the old expressions. We don't on this one, and I actually don't have that information. I don't know what ppm levels are. Um, but they are not particularly high. So Andy said a soft type of peaty whiskey, not too aggressive, a good introduction to peat. So, and then Hamish is asking, can you tell us the peat source? Is it East Highland? Yes, it's East Highland. So, when you cut your peat from Isla, if you think about where it's grown, where it's sourced, it's sort of lashed with sea spray and salt, and all those kind of flavors soak into the ground, and those flavors are in the peat, which means when you use that peat source, you get Isla peat, which is obviously very recognizable, iodine medicinal. When we use Highland peat, it's grown under heather, it's grown under moss, it's much softer, it's not really near the sea. So it's a much more floral style of peat. So that's why the peated anCnocs, they are, as you said, maybe a good introduction to peat, Andy. I think that's exactly right. They are like functionally, it's a similar flavor profile as you get from like a Lagavulin or a Bowmore, but it's much softer. And if you think about the anCnoc 12 and the anCnoc 16, we talked about how smooth they were. I think someone even mentioned maybe a bit too smooth. It's the same spirit. It's made the same way. It's just peated. So I think a lot of people think that peated whiskey is automatically going to be spicier or more intense, and that is true to an extent. But underneath that peat, that is the same incredibly soft anCnoc whiskey as the 12 and the 16. You know.
It's interesting to compare with, for those who did keep a bit of the new make. Comparing the two is quite interesting. It's a gorgeous whiskey. It's actually peatier than I remembered. I had actually looked this up and I can't remember if I've actually said it already because I was intending to and then got distracted. But yeah, last time we did an anCnoc tasting, it was about just over just under 2 years ago. And we had the Peat Heart Batch 3 on it and the anCnoc 18 as well. But I remember being like blown away by how good the Peat Heart Batch 3 was. In terms of, I know you said you don't know the ppm level in this. Were those ones higher off the top of your head or from your memory? Were they higher? With the Peat Heart smokier than this
So
one?
interestingly, when we put the ppm on the previous ones, so there's two different types of ppm. There's dry ppm and there's liquid ppm. Dry ppm is always higher. Liquid ppm is always lower, right? So when you're wanting to impress people with how incredibly peaty your whiskey is, you go with the dry ppm. And so Optimore, I believe, anything over 80 ppm from Bruichladdich is or can become Optimore. So anything from 80 up to whatever, I think I've seen it as high as like 240 or something. When we did it with anCnoc, the numbers were lower, but they were actually more accurate to the level of smoke in the whiskey, if that makes sense. It was like we were like using it was like we were using centimeters to measure and other people were using yards, you know. So it was like we were more accurate in our sort of depiction of how peaty it was. In terms of like the levels, the peat heart, so the peat heart, the peat heart's probably about the same as the peated 10. I think the peated sherry is a little bit softer. It's not quite as intense. Having said that, the peated sherry, I kind of describe it as the Ronseal of whiskies. Like it does exactly what it says on the tin. Like what is it? It's peated anCnoc matured in a sherry cask. So to me, it's like smoky barbecue bacon and strawberry jam. That's the main flavor profile that I get from anCnoc peated sherry. I think anCnoc peated sherry is absolutely stunning. I wouldn't necessarily say get a bottle of this and sit down with five friends and it'll be gone in 2 hours, just because I think the flavors are a bit punchier than the 12. But in terms of just like drinkability, it's stunning, absolutely stunning.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally agree. And Bob has said, according to Whiskey for Everyone, this is a ppm level of 13.33. That must be, as you say, that would make sense if what you're saying in terms of that's the post production ppm as opposed to the malt level ppm, because that peat level, if off the top of my head, is kind of roughly what like Springbank claims it is. And I don't think this is overly peated, but it tastes peatier than a Springbank 15 to me personally.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so yeah. Interesting. This would turn anyone to peated whiskey, says Richard. If you nose the new make against the 10 has lovely matchstick sulfury smoke. Um,
I think just need to point out as well, Luke and I were talking earlier, the peated sherry that you're drinking is 40%. So this is the new current peated sherry. But what's available on the website is the old peated sherry. The only difference between the two is the old peated sherry was 43%. The price is the same, the flavour is the same, the liquid's the same. It's just 3% higher ABV. So if you like this expression, the one that you're trying, there's absolutely no reason that you wouldn't like the 43%. You know, the difference is negligible between them. It's literally 3%.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And if you like that extra bit of flavor, then go for the higher ABV. Go for get the 43 while it's still available. The Hamish says, is it all sherry? In terms of
No. So initially American oak ex-bourbon casks, and then it's finished in sherry casks. It's a non-age statement, so I couldn't tell you how old it is. Presumably it'll be around about 7, 8 years old, but there could be some older whiskey in there as well. The thing to remember with peated whiskey is the younger the whiskey, the younger the peated whiskey generally, the more intense that peated flavour is. And there's an interesting distinction. I went to like the Whiskey Research Institute last year, and they explained it in a way that I'd never really thought about. So the way I always described it was the smoke flavour is the first flavour that is lost to the wood. So if you had a 3-year-old peated Knockdhu and a 40-year-old peated Knockdhu, the 40-year-old peated Knockdhu would taste nothing like the 3-year-old because it's had 40 years to lose that smoky flavour to the wood. But it doesn't actually lose the smoky flavour. And it's just a funny little distinction. It's the first flavour to get covered by other flavours because it's already there. You're not getting that flavour from the wood. That flavour's in the spirit. So if you think about it, you get some of the new make flavours in anCnoc 12, but it doesn't taste like new make spirit. So it's the same with peated whiskey. The longer it spends in the cask, the more other flavours kind of pile on top of that baked in smoky flavour and that's in the new make spirit. So yeah, it's relatively young, but that's in order to sort of maintain that kind of peated aspect.
Yeah, no, interesting. And Richard said, how long is it in each cask?
Well, so it's a sherry cask finish, so 6 months to a year in those sherry casks, and then maybe I couldn't say, maybe like 7, 8 years in American oak.
Interesting. And since David in the chat there has said that when you compare this whiskey versus the new make, you get a matchstick sulfury smoke. I cannot unsmell that. I feel, so yeah, I know that's not necessarily a bad thing. I like, as an ex-smoker myself, sometimes that's a nice flavor. Will we slowly come on to the 10? It'd be interesting. I'm going to keep a tiny. I've only literally got a tiny bit left in my glass. I'm going to keep a small bit to compare with the 10-year-old of this one. So this one,
Absolutely, yeah.
is there any, I suppose while we're pouring that, there's two questions because you mentioned at the start that you're kind of ex-bourbon and sherry and you don't mess around with any of those woke casks. But I see you've done collaborations. I was at an Overton brewery thing once, which was an anCnoc aged, a beer aged in anCnoc cask. I think there was a reverse whiskey, a beer cask whiskey going on there. So you obviously have experimented around with a few releases like that. What other kind of cask kind of finishes have you done?
Um, Honestly, like so that one was that was before my time, but I'm aware of that one. I think that was basically just you want to just trade casks and we'll just try something, and it was like relatively local. It would just sort of organically happened. We have also teamed up in the past with, it's not a cask finish, but I don't know if you guys remember the Peter Arkle series. So Peter Arkle's he's an illustrator, an artist. So he designed some labels for some anCnoc Peter Arkle releases. Again, that's going back like 10 plus years. But no, I mean, like, I hope that there are more casks in the warehouse that I don't know about, because for me personally, I think anCnoc would be brilliant in some kind of like port cask or red wine cask. I love rum. Rum is my second favorite spirit. anCnoc on a rum cask would blow my mind. Maybe if I sweet talk Gordon, we can secretly roll one rum cask into the warehouse and chuck it in a corner. But no, I mean it is just like anCnoc is sort of, I said right at the start, it's very traditional, and it's, it's just bourbon casks and sherry casks. What we do in the future, I couldn't say. But the sky's the limit with anCnoc. That's the thing. You've already got kind of the three main styles of whiskey. So the way I sort of describe it, the three main styles of whiskey: bourbon cask matured, sherry cask matured, and peated. And from those three, you then have like a spider diagram that goes off in every direction, and then you can use any cask type you want, and you can do whatever you want. But anCnoc's already got those three kind of core expressions down, and so we can go anywhere with it. Like you mentioned, the beer kind of collab, anCnoc and beer tastings or something we've done in the past, sort of pairing anCnoc with different beers. Not because it's like not because other whiskies don't pair well with beers, but just because anCnoc's like, I mean, we all tried the anCnoc 12 and 16. It's perfect for a half and half. Like it's a good whiskey chaser as well as a good session whiskey. It's fantastic. Yeah.
No, interesting. And I suppose, like, I mean, I don't mean to, we can kind of get caught up with the shiny new casks and, as a kind of marketing technique when these are done so well. These kind of five we've tried tonight, or the, four plus this 10-year-old we're coming into now, is yeah, you don't want to get distracted, but think that there's more shiny objects out there necessarily mean it's better. But no, it's an interesting one. Do you sell any casks to third parties?
So as far as I'm aware, no, and yet you can always seem to find them. So obviously we do in very small quantities. I don't know exactly the route that happened with, but I know that, for example, Thompson Bros they did a Balblair, Living Souls did a Balblair. I've seen a couple of, in fact, when I left a previous job, I got a bottle of 9-year-old Knockdhu in a bourbon barrel, and it was bottle number 1 from the Flying Whisky Company, Alistair Walker's company, and that was absolutely fantastic. But again, that was, I think for me, I absolutely love sherry cask whiskies. Like Bob said in the chat, rum or ruby port would be awesome. Plead with Gordon. I will do that. I absolutely love kind of rum casks, port casks. I love weird casks. But what I also really, really appreciate is just a good bourbon cask, because a good bourbon cask, there's nowhere for your spirit to hide. That's the sort of, that's your distillery naked standing on stage. A bourbon cask whiskey. If you can't make a good bourbon cask whiskey, then you're probably going to struggle to make good any other whiskey. And so I think that as much as I love weird casks, I also love coming back to kind of the basics almost. I don't want to say the basics, that maybe sounds a bit sort of demeaning, but I like to come back to the start and just sort of revisit what makes whiskey good in the first place.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. I can see that. If you on Bob's comment, I was thinking, if he's saying obviously rum and ruby port would be awesome. Plead with Gordon. What you got to say to Gordon is, say, Gordon, don't a-knock it till you try it. The So Richard has said the 10-year-old is close to the peated. What is I mean, apart from the fact that one's got 10 years slapped on the label, what's the difference? Because the 10-year-old does taste like it's got a bit of sherry cask in there.
10-year-old is all American oak ex-bourbon
Wow.
casks, so there's no sherry in the 10 at all whatsoever.
You were saying about the 12-year-olds that you felt there was that sherry influence coming through. I can feel it more on this than I could with that one, definitely. That's
Interesting. Okay. Well, maybe in 10 years' time, I'll try and dig up a spreadsheet that will prove prove your theory, as I managed
Yeah,
to prove
maybe,
my
yeah.
own.
The original recipe, blow it off, and be like, oh my God. No, marvelous. And I've actually realized I've forgotten to mention. So the anCnoc peated sherry cask is £50. That's before the discount. And with the discount, it is obviously cheaper than that. 750. Oh, sorry, 750 off, so 42.50. And then the yeah, this is only £53, this 10-year-old. It's only £3 in the difference. Is the sherry peated part of the core nowadays? And
Yeah, so the four that we've tried
both these
today,
are?
this is the core range, and as I
Mm.
said, keep your eyes peeled. In the future, we'll release a 21, which is replacing the 24-year-old. But yeah, so the peated sherry we launched it about, I think maybe about 2.5 years ago, um, alongside well, Peat Heart was doing really well, the various batches, so we introduced a sort of core peated expression, and then the Peat Heart did so well that we introduced the peated 10 to kind of replace the Peat Heart. So now, anything in a black tube with a black label from anCnoc is peated. Anything in a white tube with a white label is unpeated. So tried to sort of make it as clear as possible. Hamish says, you said the 10 peated was a continuation. Was Peat Heart also 100% ex-bourbon? Yes, it was. They were all 100% ex-bourbon. They were all bottled at 46%, so they were all a little bit higher strength, but they were all also limited releases. Now, obviously, limited is a subjective term when it comes to whiskey, but the Peat Heart, we did 3 batches over 7 years, which I think is pretty fast going. Like we didn't make tons of it because Knockdhu is not a massive distillery.
Hmm. No, interesting. I suppose the reason I actually asked about that core range thing is because this is obviously they're both gorgeous whiskies, but you obviously got them at a very similar price point here, at least the way we're retailing them at between being 50 and 53, which for a kind of core range, you kind of people tend to have that kind of more like you've had with the 12 and 16, where there's that kind of progression in price point as you kind of want to explore something a bit different. But I thought, was there a reason behind that, or is that just a coincidence? Or
I think it's a combination of coincidence, and also at the end of the day, it's a 10-year-old whiskey. There's
Hmm.
only so well, we spoke earlier about the price of 12-year-old whiskies. There's only so much you can sell a 10-year-old whiskey for, before people go, I'm not paying that. And so I think it's anCnoc, the pricing, I think, has always been very transparent, and I think fair. I mean, I am fundamentally biased when I talk about that, but I think that the pricing, yeah, the pricing for anCnoc has always been fair. 12-year-old for what, £45 at full price, but you've got your discount today. And then the 16 is £80. anCnoc, we don't, even when the 21 launches, we've not agreed on what price it'll launch at yet, so we don't know exactly, but it's not going to be a £200 bottle, because that would be totally out of whack with the rest of the anCnoc range. To go from £45 up to £80 and then jump to 200, it's not in keeping with the pricing that we've kind of established. I think anCnoc is just, yeah, I think it's just really fairly priced.
Yeah. No, I totally I don't disagree that it's fairly priced. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Hey, I just we just that there was two in the range that were so similarly priced is the point, but I totally agree with you. It's definitely fairly priced. Um, we've got Bob says the 10 is similarly as dangerous to the 12. I totally agree, Bob. And Paula says, is it interesting that you put an age label on it for the 10-year-old, or is that a legacy thing, or what was the thoughts behind that?
That, I think, is more to do with differentiation of the range.
Mm.
Obviously, the peated sherry was established non-age statement. So for releasing another peated whiskey, obviously they're two different styles. One is sherry finish and one is not, unless Luke is right, and we'll find out in 10 years. But
Maybe I've
the
just had too much whiskey in there. Taste my palate's gone.
but if I think it's just a point of difference. It's if we release two non-age statement peated whiskies at the same price, one of them is sherry, one of them is bourbon, I think it's pretty obvious which one would sell quicker,
Mm.
just because of the flavors that people generally enjoy. But having a 10-year-old age statement is just a point of difference, and we've got the capability to age this stock. We've probably got, or we definitely got older peated stock available. What we're doing with it, I don't know. Maybe we'll do limited releases in the future, or maybe not. I have no idea. Unfortunately, as much as I'd love to be, I'm not really privy to those conversations.
Yeah.
If I was privy to those conversations, it'd be 2 new anCnocs every month, and it'd be out of business in a year. But I'd be very happy because I'd have so much new anCnoc.
They actually just vox popped people in Sweden and said, "What do you think?" And then that was it. The Mitch says the peated is very oaky. Sorry, the 10-year-old peated, that is very oaky and no harshness on the end notes. Really good, and price is crazy good value. Is the 20-year-old imminent to or imitate? Sorry, is the 20-year-old imitate to X amount of bottles? Limited, I suppose they mean. Unless I'm
Um, no, it's the
it's just
21 year
joining
old
the
will be
core.
part of the core range. It'll be smaller batch because of the age statement, but it's not going to be it's not a batch release. It's not going to have bottle numbers on it. It's very much it's the kind of culmination of the anCnoc range.
Marvelous. And Hamish just says the 24-year-old is outrageously good. It used to be very reasonable in the US, but has gone up recently. Is that now discontinued? I think you said earlier that it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the 24 is gone, Hamish, unfortunately. Be replaced with the 21-year-old, which is due out next year. But even the 20, talk about pricing and anCnoc, the 24-year-old, uh, when it was available, I think it retailed for anywhere from like 180 to £210, which is yeah, was I mean, what incredible value for money. So Hamish, if you spot it in the US, even if it's gone up and you like it, I would just pick up a bottle because there's never or there's not going to be more of that expression. Who knows what the future holds for anCnoc and Knockdhu? Like we brought a 16-year-old back, not the same 16-year-old, but we kind of came full circle with a 16-year-old. Who knows what we'll do in the future? But right now, yeah, run, don't walk. Exactly, Hamish. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said, Hamish. Some great contributions tonight from Hamish. Brilliant. I've put in the discount code in there, WS25AN, which will get you 15% off all the drams you tried tonight. And if which I think might be happening in our July orders, the new peated sherry oak or anCnoc peated sherry, the knowledge statement one, we tried the fourth one, is comes in stock for July. I'll apply the discount code to that SKU as well. So which I think it will be, especially if you all buy up the 43% one now, then we'll have to buy it in. So discount code looks like a postcode. It does actually, yeah. But it's just whiskey shop 25 AN for anCnoc. So there's nothing secret. There's no mystery behind it. Bob says got my 22 for £75 and 24 for £115. That was 2017 and 2019. Time to crack them open. Definitely, Bob. Whiskey's there to be drank. Although I do miss the prices we used to be able to get whiskey for back in 2017. Geez, if I knew then what I knew now, I'd fill my boots. So I said I would buy the two peated, but I'm not about to move house. My wife is sorry, but I am about to move house, and my wife is distressed about the number of boxes packed with just whiskey. Well, Alistair, when are you moving house? Do you have access to the new location? New location. We can always just put that as the delivery address, and you'd be laughing, or
Just
find a
pass it
friend.
off as a friend's moving present. It'll be
Yeah,
fine.
exactly. Be like, oh look, the neighbors called round and they gave us all this whiskey to welcome us to the neighborhood. There you go. That's it. Go drive down there and get in touch with the new neighbors and say, look, I'm going to get some stuff delivered to your house. I need you to come over with it. After that, the brilliant. Now is normally the time in the evening where people kind of let us know what their kind of preferences were throughout the night, what the favorite whiskeys were. Chris, do you have a favorite out of these ones? I know you said the 12-year-old had a soft spot for you, but if you could
I
only
think,
go to your head, you could only drink one of them for the rest of your life.
12-year-old. The 12-year-old is just absolutely stunning. And I can't, I think the range is brilliant, but I think that 12-year-old is arguably one of the nicest 12-year-olds money can buy. And I say that as a passionate whiskey lover, whiskey drinker. Long before I worked for Interbev and worked with anCnoc, I like when I worked at the whiskey shop, I just sold case after case after case of anCnoc 12 because it's just the perfect whiskey for almost everybody.
Yeah. No, I can totally see that. Um, it's very approachable, very drinkable. I think you nailed it yourself when you were saying that it's kind of perfect, complex enough for the whiskey drinker and approachable enough for the one who doesn't. Seems to be a real mixed bag tonight in terms of which people prefer. Which is people who come on here regularly will know that it's normally there's kind of one or two that kind of run away, but we've got the 16, we've got the 10-year-old. Got the 16, 16, 16. So maybe the 16's running away. But we've also got the peach sherry there, the 12-year-old. I think that's a really good sign, Chris, that if there's so many different ones from the range have emerged. I think every single one of the whiskies, apart from the new make that we tried tonight, has got at least one mention for their favorite of the night. So that's I think a testament to the quality of the range. Is there anything else related to anCnoc you wanted to share with us before we call it a night?
Um, I mean, what I will say, Bob earlier mentioned that he had the 22 and the 24-year-old time to crack them open. This isn't really about anCnoc, but I'm going to just hop back on my soapbox for 2 seconds because I've made it my personal mission to make sure that people realize that whiskey is fun. It's not just a stuffy, it's not, whiskey is not sitting down in a big leather armchair reading the business papers or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a businessman in that regard. Whiskey's fun and exciting, and it is. You mentioned it earlier. Look, it's all made to be opened and drunk, right? All of it. So I think, yeah, if you've got a bottle of 18, you've got a bottle of 24, you've got a bottle of 22, you've got a bottle of Rascan, Flotter, Slaughter, Peter Arkle, all 1975, 30-year-old, all these different expressions, just get it open, enjoy it, make the most of it. One of the greatest things you can do in life is open a bottle of champagne on a Tuesday just because it's a Tuesday. There's no point saving it for a special occasion because it's so good and it's all made to be drunk. So I'll just step off my soapbox now. But yeah, just want to say thank you so much, guys, and I really appreciate the time you've taken here. And I'm so glad that sort of the full range has gone down really well. As you said, like often when you do tastings like this, there's sort of like a clear front runner. But it's nice to see that it seems like the whole range is neck and neck.
Yeah, no, marvelous. And thank you for your time, Chris. It's been a really enjoyable tasting, and thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate your comments in the chat there at the end. Camille said any ghost stories. It's the thing we do in the not stores on whiskey tasting sessions. Do you have a ghost story, Chris?
Uh, like for anCnoc or just in general, because I live in
Just in
Edinburgh,
general, let's
so
say is what he means.
the
Clarify
arguably the
there.
most haunted city in the world, I think, Edinburgh. So I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm absolutely obsessed with ghost tours. I listen to ghost podcasts. Um, I watch horror movies. I absolutely love ghost stuff. Do I have a ghost story? Not for me personally, but my sister, when we were in Ireland as kids years ago, my sister was staying at our cousin's house, and she said that there was an old woman that would come in and sit at the end of the bed. And then they told my aunt about this, and she was like, "Oh yeah, that old woman looked after all my kids." And my aunt is older than my dad, so all of their kids were sort of like in their 20s when I was like 10. And it was just very like, yeah, she's looked after every single one of those kids. And it was like an old country house in Donegal. So I think the house was probably built in the 1800s. But yeah, I mean, it was like I think ghosts are fascinating. I don't, just to be clear, I don't believe in them. I want to believe in them, but I've never seen one.
Yeah. No, I get that. I have a few ghost stories, but I remember it's maybe in my mid to late 20s. I was taking a run in the woods, and it was like kind of at that time in maybe September, October, where you've been used all summer to the evenings going out so late. And I'd finished work and I went out and I kind of totally mistimed it. And I was coming back through this forestry area and it was pitch black. And there's like an old castle ruin nearby and an old holy well. So it's like they're all kind of buried in the forest. And I'm running along, and the little bit of sunlight there is totally covered by the canopy of the forest. And this isn't a ghost story, but I remember thinking like shiver went up my spine, and realized I was running in pitch black, all on my own, miles from civilization. And I was initially my heart rate went up, and I was petrified. And I was like, oh, I just realized, you know what? If I see a ghost, how cool would it be to say you saw a ghost? So I was like, let's just rock on and just see what happens. Because worst case scenario, I die. Best case scenario, I have a cracking story for the pub later on. And since then I've never been afraid of ghosts. But no, it's been great fun. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. Thank you for Camille for the great comment in there. See if there's anyone who's got. I mean, there's great kind words from Wayne and Nick, saying only of the 12 to waiting on a bit of the range. So yeah, no, thank you for all your kind comments in there. And I hope you have a fantastic evening, folks. And we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye now.